Um, welcome everybody to, and it's great to see so many of you on the call actually, it's really fantastic. So my name is Hannah Bartram, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for ADEPT, which is the body that represents local authority directors of place from across England. So these are the directors that are responsible for implementing active travel solutions within their localities. So we're delighted to be co-hosting today's webinar with Arcadis, who are a corporate partner of ADEPT, but also a Dutch-owned global business that has been really involved in designing and delivering active travel solutions and behaviour change in the Netherlands for decades. Before I go any further, I just want to run through a few housekeeping rules. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So you'll be very familiar with these after 10 months of Teams calls, but can you, if you could just switch off your cameras and mute your microphones. We're really keen that you use the chat box to put your points of view across or to ask questions. If it is a question, it just would be really helpful from our point of view. If you could proceed it with the letter Q, just to make it simpler. We are recording. So we're taking it that you're happy for us to do so, and we will be posting the video of today's webinar onto the ADEPT YouTube account in a few days after today's event. So please do go and look again if you want to revisit any of it. And we'll be using Menti. So during the panel discussions, which we've got coming up, we'll be using Menti for some interactive audience polls. So a quick heads up that you'll need either another device like your phone or your other screen to visit www.menti.com. We will be putting the code up that you need to access the specific question. But I'll talk you through it when we get to those particular slides. So turning to today's event, we've got some fantastic speakers lined up, and your chair today is Colin Black, who you can probably see down the bottom of your screen, who is a partner at Arcadis UK. But before we hand the baton over to Colin and Arcadis, could I introduce you to Mark Kemp, who wears a number of hats. So he is chair of the ADEPT Transport and Connectivity Board and also vice president of ADEPT. And then in his spare time, he's also the Director of Environment and Infrastructure at Hertfordshire County Council. Mark, can I hand over to you? You are on mute, Mark. I'm sure you've been very erudite, but you're on mute.
Ah, so I've got the first badge, so nobody else can feel embarrassed about it for the rest of the event, so that's fantastic. Just to say, I'm sure that the pandemic, whilst it's a really worrying thing for us all to live through, has presented a number of opportunities for us in this particular area of responsibility, and I think we need to make sure that we take advantage of that as best we can. As the Transport and Connectivity Board of ADEPT, we've worked together to develop an active travel position statement, which is available on our website if you ever want to see it, with some really interesting data in it. But just to kind of summarise, one of the things that the sort of things we're saying is that it's a key component of our response to the climate challenge that we all face. But it's also really important in terms of building the health and well-being of communities and contributing towards that. So thinking about travel as a supporter of a number of initiatives holistically across what we're all looking to do, and that we do need people to think quite long and hard about why they're not adopting and adapting to the active travel environment. So we certainly think that there is a silent majority out there, and they need to be far more vocal about their support. That one of our real challenges in getting these things over the line is the vocal minority. And we're also looking to central government in terms of a number of things. Firstly, helping us win the argument. So looking at things like behavioural science, data and evidence that supports the decisions that we're looking to make around, the economic prosperity of high streets and all those sorts of things that are supported through active travel. Looking at capital funding for new schemes and making sure that we are enough money in to enable us to develop complete systems rather than bits of systems, which is a real challenge that we face as a group of directors. And then finally, adequate support for ongoing maintenance, because this is really an area where we have a challenge. But in that area, I think it's fair to say that ADEPT's position is that we should be making sure that that local authorities are adequately supported to fulfil all the functions that they need to fulfil, because otherwise you end up with this really difficult decision that members have to make. So whether they're going to look after Aunt Mavis in her care home, or cut the grass and the hedges back so that people can cycle around the network, and they're quite hard choices to make. I know which one I'd be doing, and Aunt Mavis would get her food, and we would have overgrown hedges. So we do need to make sure that people are thinking about that in a holistic way. So mindful of that, and not wishing to tread too far on Arcadis' toes in terms of all the things that they're going to be saying and discussing. I'm really, really grateful to them for sponsoring this event. Really impressed with the number of people who are turning up. So thank you to all for doing that. And I'd like to hand over to Colin, who is going to be the ringmaster for the event.
Thank you very much, Mark. Let me just get the slides on. Hannah, did you want to run through this, or should I just kind of?
No, I'm very happy to do so. Yeah, thanks very much then, Mark. So we've got a pretty packed agenda for the day. We've got a couple of panel discussions which Colin will facilitate, and also Kerry Stewart will help with the questions. So we've broken it down into two sections, as you can see there, and then we'll wrap up. We're definitely going to finish by 12 o'clock, but please do remember to mute your phones if you've just joined, and also to use the chat box to ask any questions. So back to you, Colin.
Great, thank you very much. So today, wanted to try and make sure, we've all been in a lot of calls. We've all spent a lot of time over the last 10 months on Zoom and Teams. So I think what we'd like to do today is really make sure we kind of maximise the energy and keep it as relevant and as exciting as we possibly can for you to maintain your interest. So a really packed agenda, lots of really interesting themes that we're going to cover, and really appreciate your questions and your interaction in the chat box, as Hannah has said. Before we get on, thought it'd be worthwhile just each of the panel members giving you a wave and saying hello. So let's go to Marloes first.
Yes, thanks. I'm Marloes, and the kids on the bottom of this, the bottom picture are mine. So it's Daniel, Pepijn, and Joris, and I'm cycling with them a lot. So thanks.
Great, and Kerry.
And morning, everyone. My name's Kerry Stewart, and I can't take credit for any of those children, I'm afraid.
And Mark.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Well, then I will take credit for the upper two children, but it's an older picture. So those are my kids, Luke and Max, almost 11 and 12 years old right now. And I'm also, like Marloes, a traffic consultant with Arcadis.
Great. If you want to know more about any of the speakers today, please have a look at the email that will have been sent to you as part of your registration for the event, which has detailed bios on all of the people contributing today. So on to our first question for the panel. As we know, the Dutch are often perceived as a nation of cyclists. And I'm regularly reminded by my colleagues, particularly in the Netherlands, that the Netherlands is actually, in fact, simply a country where lots of people cycle. So I thought it'd be useful just to hear some thoughts on the key events or decisions that have really defined how the levels of cycling were established. And then perhaps Kerry, you can provide a little bit of contrast on your thoughts about how we perhaps have done things differently in the UK. So Mark, do you want to take that question first?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Yeah, why do many people cycle in the Netherlands? There's no simple answer to the question, because there are a lot of bicycle-friendly factors that reinforce each other. Of course, the Netherlands is really dense. We've got a lot of small cities, a lot of bigger cities connected to the smaller cities in total. But it means the journeys and distances are short, so it's easy to cycle. Then we also have a lot of facilities, more than 35,000 kilometers of dedicated cycle paths. You can always park your bike everywhere you want. And it's just a normal way of transport. Me and Colin were discussing in preparation for this webinar, the people in Lycra versus the people that cycle in the Netherlands. We wear Lycra to race our bike, but a normal bike is just for the way to school, to friends, to shop, etc. But I guess then it's always the question, how did we get here? Because we didn't get all those facilities at once. Do you want me to continue, Colin?
Yeah, please.
Please. Well, what are the main events that happened? I think, like in the UK, as well as in many other countries in Europe and all across the world, between the 50s and the 70s, affordable cars came onto the market. Everybody was driving a car, and we were also redesigning our cities to be dedicated to the car. People could come into the city by car and commute by car to the city from the suburbs. I think that's no different than any other country, but the Dutch, sorry for my English, sometimes I have to look for the right words. But the Dutch found out that those cities weren't very hospitable for active transport, as well as cyclists, as people that were walking. We had a huge number of deaths, primarily child deaths on the road. So people demanded for livable and safe streets. And that resulted in the design manual for bicycle traffic. And then people all around the Netherlands changed policy, and we're aiming for safer streets and people-friendly streets and livable streets. And even now, the last 10 years, and as we are speaking today, we are constantly redesigning our cities and aiming for more use of the bicycle. We were talking about the cycling 3.0. It's a future side of how are we going to cycle in the Netherlands for the next 10 years or 20 years. Those are, as you have may read in our bios, are two projects Marloes and I are also working on. So, yeah, that's in short, I guess, Colin.
Well, fascinating stuff. Just very quickly, when did the Dutch get their design manual?
The first one, I think it was put together in 1989 or something, and then there's constantly updating, and I think it's also available in English, so maybe you can use some of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've just got LTN 120 tail end of last year. As a kind of be interesting to see how it contrasts with what you produced in the late 80s. Kerry, do you want a couple of quick observations to reflect on what Mark said?
Certainly, yeah. I was thinking about, and I was kind of looking back to sort of the history in the UK, and I think if we kind of look back to the influential Traffic and Towns report, which was written in 1963, the basic proposition really was that most people would choose to own a car if they could, and our places have really been designed to support car travel, and so this has actually proved to be true. And the incentive for owning a car is strong because people perceive that their lives are dependent, or they're more convenient, or they're perceived as more convenient if they use a car. And urban cycling wasn't really encouraged at that time for reasons of safety, and also because the car was seen as dominant, and it was important to allow the free flow of traffic. And just really to think about, it just seems that we didn't, and we haven't perhaps until now, valued the urban environment as much as the Dutch, because we haven't wanted to constrain freedom to own and use our own cars.
Some interesting reflections, and I think that kind of takes us really neatly on to the next question here, around culture and thinking about, I mean, the cultural factors. Many people still continue to claim that it was easy to establish a cycling culture in the Netherlands because it's flat, and you're different, and you have a different culture in the Netherlands. So I think I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on those kind of often mooted accusations. As obviously it's based on fact, but it's kind of seen as that's the main reason why they're so successful in the Netherlands. And what I think I hear from my colleagues is the constant drip feed and the constant approach you've taken, sort of to build in and constantly reinforce and improve cycling over many decades. So what are the most influential cultural factors you think has really ensured cycling has become a key method of travel? Perhaps Marlos, you could lead us off with some thoughts on that question.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Yeah, I think our cycling culture starts with cycling in our daily life, which we learn at a very young age. So it's with children who learn at 2 or 3 years to ride their balance bike, and then further on, when you go to elementary school, they also ride their bike. They're being brought by the bicycle by the parents. So it's from very young age that we learn that cycling is for daily use and not only for sports. And as I know that in the UK there are school buses to go to secondary or high school. Well, we don't have any school buses. All our scholars and students ride a bicycle to school. So I think it's very important that when you learn at young age that cycling is just a daily thing to do, a daily transport, then when you are an adult, you also use your bicycle for the shorter distances. For example, a short distance is not just 1 or 2 kilometers, but when I went to high school, it was a daily 9 kilometers just to school and 9 kilometers back. So that was just what we do. And also, yeah, Mark already said it's not. It's very dense country, so the distances aren't very long. So then it's really a good way of travel.
It's fascinating to contrast, isn't it? We've had this discussion before about how you see queues of school children waiting for the buses, and the buses are stuck in traffic waiting to get to secondary school. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you cycle 9 kilometers each way to school?
Yes.
Yeah.
It takes half an hour, and
yeah.
it's safe route, so that's okay. And of course, I didn't go by myself, but with a group of people. So. Yes.
It does seem to be a key difference in the way in which we have we approach cycling in the UK. Is that continuation? You learn to ride a bike as a young child, but there's not those kind of those positive role models, your parents, and you're not encouraged to cycle as much to school. So by the time you then become an adult, you've perhaps got out of the habit. So it's a really interesting observation. Kerry, any observations from you?
Yeah, just kind of to reinforce what we're talking about in terms of schools and access to schools and providing those safe routes to schools as a priority, and the fact that almost half of all primary school children are driven to school, and almost a quarter of secondary school children are driven to school. So that's a huge difference, and if you contrast that with the Netherlands.
Absolutely.
Colin, may I reflect on that one?
Yeah, do.
Yeah, because I was triggered by something Kerry mentioned to me. My children asked me about a month ago when was the last time you brought us to school by car? I couldn't even remember, because it's so normal for us to send our kids off to school when they are 6 or 7 years old on their own, because the school is also 5 to 10 minutes away from our house. And it is safe for them to drive to school by themselves, cycle by school.
Yep, absolutely. I think this takes us on to the next question, really, around livability, and again, just reflecting the difference in approach between the UK and the Dutch approach. And I kind of the Dutch planning systems constantly seems to reinforce the need to create livable neighbourhoods in towns with and to really focus on not looking necessarily at cycle schemes per se, but how you actually create neighbourhoods that have good quality of life. And this, I'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts on how this focus on livability has really facilitated and created that comprehensive cycling network, and perhaps then contrast that, Kerry, with how we do things in the UK. And I just think kind of often we've got fragmented approaches and they're all different modes of trying to do different things. And I think somehow it feels like the kind of the focus on livability is the gel that really helps to kind of coordinate things. Mark, do you want to share some thoughts on that one?
To watch out, I'm gonna take an hour, but we believe cycling is safer when there are no cars around, or when at least the speed differences with motorized traffic are small. So these are also important factors for us to create a livable neighborhood. We tend to say urban areas are meant for living and not for transport. So when designing a new neighborhood, a new area, or redesigning an old neighborhood, we use an inclusive way of thinking, and we use also, maybe you have heard of it. It's called bike-oriented development. In most neighborhoods and cities, most schools and shops are within 10 or 30 minutes a bike ride. So people are in most cases even faster on their bike to their destination than by car. And there's also a lot of room to park your bike in front of the shop, in front of the school, and even closer than when driving by a car. And then there's no matter what kind of area we design, we always make it reachable for as well as motorized traffic, as well as active modes of transport. For instance, if you look at our big industrial areas like Schiphol or the Rotterdam harbor, those places are meant for transport of goods, transport of people, which means we have to put in wide roads for lorries and trucks. But there are also a lot of people that work there, and for those people, it's always a good opportunity to ride a bike to work, because it takes up, we don't need a lot of parking spaces for those people. And when those people come to work by car and meet all the traffic with the goods, it leads up to traffic jams. So we're constantly looking for other ways of transport. And by connecting Schiphol or Rotterdam Harbor to the Rotterdam, we create a network, and it goes on and on and on, which leads to the high dense network we have right now.
Perhaps Kerry could start to sort of contrast that with some of the approaches to livability that we've typically adapted in the UK. Yeah, but it feels like a new concept, doesn't it, in the UK?
It does. I mean, I was thinking about a project that I'm involved in Arbroath in the northeast of Scotland, where going back to that sort of traffic in towns and the dominance of the car, a dual carriageway was built through the town 40 years ago, over-engineered, not necessary for a small town, but really creating that car dependency. And then, you know, sort of a few years ago, there has been consultation with the community through planning charrettes, and the community highlighted that road was really detrimental to their quality of life and the livability of their town, and they really wanted to see something done about it. And so the council has been able to secure Scottish Government funding to reallocate that road space to a segregated active travel route. So that's a really good step forward. But it feels like we're much far behind the Dutch in that sense. And then also in relation to our new developments in the UK, we don't do enough really to encourage that walking and cycling, so that people don't form those bad habits from the beginning. And we really need to have more of a focus on that detailed investment in cycling connectivity and walking connectivity for all of our development projects, so that, you know, we don't create those bad habits.
It does feel sometimes, doesn't it, that we have lots of projects. We might have a bus corridor project, and we might have a public realm improvement project, and a cycle route project, all going on, or a traffic congestion busting project, all going on in the same urban area. And none of them are, they're all trying to look at one particular element and real particular focus, but not really kind of thinking of the overall more holistic picture about what they're trying to achieve. And I think that, to me, is a real key contrast between the way in which the Dutch have approached things. They don't go out and have a budget for a cycle path. It's a budget for improving the urban area, and if it's urban cycle path, parking control, with a bit of a public realm improvement, then that becomes the scheme, and it's not so rigidly money's not so rigidly allocated into these silos, which perhaps kind of takes us on to the next question for this morning, around funding, and just trying to understand, in the UK, for example, when we try and apply web tag analysis that predominantly values time savings to justify cycling infrastructure in comparison to other modes, we really tend to struggle. We have to spend a lot of money on monitoring cycling schemes and evaluating the impact of cycling schemes. And the fact that infrastructure is usually allocated to these pots per mode, and then appraisal is used to sort of try and determine which of the priorities within those pots, makes it really a challenge to unlock that funding. And you contrast the amount of funding we've got for cycling compared to some of the other modes, and there's a real disparity. So perhaps, Marlos, you could give us some more insight in how the Dutch do things.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think some of this has already been said, but in the Netherlands, we look at cycling as one of the modalities that can improve the accessibility of our towns and our cities. So it's an integral challenge where we want to develop neighborhoods where we provide a livable and mobility livability and mobility. So we can develop accessibility with a combination of various types of modality, like walking, cycling, driving car, or even shared cars, scooters and bicycles, and of course public transport. So together, with all these modalities, we achieve a livable and accessible neighborhood or city. I think that's most important, because if people stop using their car but are cycling to work or school or whatever, then this will decrease the congestion of cars. So there's a win-win situation. So I think it's not just about cycling or just about the infrastructure for cars, but it's about well, livability, accessibility, but also health and safety. I think that's what how we look at it.
Yes, that focus on the greater objectives, the wider objectives, and
yes,
it's not so much focused on kind of demonstrate the financial value and return on investment. Kerry, any reflections you want to make?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think we could. Do you want to move on to some questions?
Yeah,
Quite a few questions in the chat box. Yeah. So there's a couple of comments and questions around e-bikes, and what's the take up of e-bikes in the Netherlands, and perhaps is that something that could support increasing cycling levels in the UK? Yeah,
I would like to answer this. When I graduated many years ago on the design of an e-bike, and then it was the e-bike was just for old people, and it was not a fancy thing. It was for old people who couldn't cycle. But nowadays, it's really about the increasing of the distance you can go by bike. So it's I think the commuters' use of bicycles has increased very much because of the e-bike. we have the e-bike and the speed pedelec, which where you can cycle even longer distances. So also in Netherlands, it's really important the design of the e-bike.
I remember from some of the work we did in Copenhagen, they extended the radial cycle routes into the city as a result of e-mobility, e-bikes coming online, because people were wanting to then cycle longer distances for their morning commute. So it kind of it needs to be considered in when we're designing the cycle infrastructure. It's actually it opens up significantly the demand for those routes. Conscious of time, I suggest we take a bit of time for a quick poll, if we may, and I'll hand over to Hannah to run through the poll and to explain proceedings.
Okay, thanks very much. And that was a really interesting conversation that I've just been listening to. So this is our first poll question. You can read it on the screen. If you could please go to www.menti.com. I'm using my phone. I don't know how is best for you. And then the code you'll be asked to enter that code 3598139. That will take you to that question in Menti. You can choose as many options as you so choose to answer the question, which is around the most significant barriers restricting our ability to increase cycling. Whilst you're doing that, we'll give you 30 seconds to tick the boxes to read and digest, and then what we'll do is we'll bring up a screen showing the results as they're coming in. So I'll just stop talking for a few seconds while you tick those. The code is on the screen, 3598139. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, Helen, could you bring up the screen? Because I know you're going to have to, you replaced Colin if you like, so you share your screen. So if you bear with us 1 second, there we go. So please keep answering. The answers come in even though Helen is sharing the screen. So hopefully you can see that. Colin, were you going to kind of talk through some of the responses? We're getting some good numbers in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think immediately is coming through that kind of that concern about the UK culture, which is an interesting thing. Lack of cycle routes, but lack of local commitment. I think that is really interesting to see, and it's coming up on the outside there. The sort of from local councillors, from the prioritization of investment, the difficulties of engaging with local businesses, but also there in kind of the local culture, I think is really been highlighted. The fact that in the UK we still don't see it as cool to cycle. It's dominated too much by people clad in lycra, and it's not seen as there's that lack of role models and that lack of continuation of that culture from throughout the school years, as we've discussed. And we all know kind of if you want to cycle, you need good, direct, high quality routes. So it's not a surprise. It's just great to see it's reflected. I see a comment there about not about being cool, about being lazy. I don't think so. I think it's yeah. I think actually you look at the Dutch culture and you look at the fact that there's been these positive role models from their parents, from politicians, from the king. Everybody in their culture cycles and makes a conscious effort to role model and demonstrate the value of cycling. And I think that really starts to permeate through and it changes the culture. And one thing about the Dutch culture is that it evolves. Culture is not static. Things change and behaviours change and evolve over time.
Yeah, and
I think we've got a little.
May I add to that? It's just so normal for us. Yeah, I keep trying to remember what you said, Colin, in preparation. For us, this is so normal. I tried to take a video last week. Marloes shot a video from her commute to work. I had a video from our Prime Minister who went to the King to resign his cabinet. He went there by bike. Normally, politicians drive bigger cars, escorted by police. He just drives a bike, maybe with one police officer on a bike behind him, but that's it. That's our Prime Minister. And you also showed a picture of our King in the first slide. When opening a cycling bridge, the daughters of our King cycle to school. That's every morning. It's normal here, and that makes it sometimes for us Dutch people so hard to help you understand our culture, because we don't see it as a culture. It's normal.
Great observations. I think we've got a chance to take a few more questions in the chat, Kerry, if you wanted to.
Yeah, so another question here around air quality, and does air quality play a part in further encouraging the use of active travel in the Netherlands? Is that something that you consider, Mark?
Yes, especially within the bigger cities where congestion is still an issue. A few years ago, of course, the city of London started to taxing. No, forget that one. Sorry.
No problem.
But what I was trying to say, yeah, of course, in bigger cities, it's always better for us to use an active and a healthy mode of transport. So to get out, to move all the cars to the outer skirts of the city. We are improving the cycle paths within the city, the living areas. It's not a primary goal, but it's, as Marloes said, it's one of the objectives next to accessibility and livability.
Okay, yeah, great. And then another question here around sort of thinking about our discussion on livability, and we touched on new developments, and in the Netherlands, does that livability principle apply to how you design and build housing development? So a big impediment to cycling in cities is where you store your bike. Is it secure? And if it's an apartment, do you have room for it? And that kind of thing. Is that something that's sort of embedded in the Netherlands?
Yeah, we've also got like guidelines for those. When creating an apartment building, we have to create storage for bicycles. As well as we need to create parking space for people that have a car. We also have parking spaces for bikes. And if you go to the city of Amsterdam, where a space is limited, it's not uncommon to create a bicycle parking space on a previous car space. If you look at those solutions, taking out one parking space for a car gives you 5 to 7 parking spaces for a bike.
Yeah.
When redesigning new buildings, we have to apply the regulations for bicycle storage.
Okay, and sort of related to that, are there publicly accessible maintenance facilities as part of that for your bike? That is. So are there basic tools, are there cycle pumps available as part of the infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm going to leave this one to Marloes.
Yeah, well, I think every town has at least 1 or 2 bike shops and also bike repair shops. And in the cities and near the stations, there's usually an underground parking space for bicycles, and there's usually a pump or a mechanic who can help you. And also on Sunday, of course, most shops are closed, but lots of shops have a bicycle pump outside, so you can use it if you're having a flat tire.
Okay. Yeah, quite a simple solution there. Yeah. And so, and then another question here around about the prioritization of cycling routes. Is that something that's done at maybe a local, regional, national level? And has that been a factor in encouraging cycling?
Particularly around maintenance, I think the question was.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So how do you make sure you how do you make sure you maintain, and coming back to Mark's original question, kind of if he had to choose between maintaining a cycleway or keeping the care home open, the care home always and social care will always trump cycle maintenance. Well, how do you prioritize it in the Netherlands, and why is it seen as more important in the Netherlands than perhaps in the UK?
It's a difficult one, because I don't see the maintenance of a cycle path any different than maintenance of a normal motorized road. So when prioritizing maintenance, it's not depending on whether it's for bicycles or it's for cars. Maintenance is a normal way of keeping the infrastructure up to its level.
I think that's a really key point, Mark. I think actually we seem to have a hierarchy of maintenance priorities, and perhaps we just need to make sure that actually that the key thing here is that there's a de minimis level of maintenance for cycle parking that's exactly the same as what we'd expect in a road. You'd address the potholes, you'd keep it clean, you'd keep the vegetation cut back, and you'd keep it functioning very, very well.
Yeah, and there's often capital funding available for new routes, but the revenue funding is difficult, and that cutting back the hedges and so on often is just not feasible, or there's that difficult choice.
Perhaps an opportunity to introduce some new standards.
Okay, I think we've probably got an opportunity for one more question just to finish off. A question around cycle theft. Do you think cycle theft plays a part in discouraging people to cycle? Are cycle rates, crime rates, what they like in the Netherlands? Do you know?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, we used to have a lot of cycle theft, but the last few years we've been investing in free parking spaces, guarded parking spaces. So, for instance, if you park your bicycle near a station, there's always a guarded parking space available, but it's free for the first 24 hours. So why not park it there? So we've got the facilities available, and on the other hand, we've got 17 million people in the Netherlands and over 22 million bikes. So there's always a bike available for everyone. So theft is not a necessity. But no, I don't think it will in the Netherlands. It brings down the use of bikes. No. Yes, I'm stuck in my words.
Are bikes seen more kind of as a utility rather than, because people in the UK maybe are more attached to their bikes than maybe in the Netherlands?
Yeah, it is a utility. It is for us quite normal to have a rattle bike. It's maybe 20-25 years old, but if it still does the work you use it for, why buy a new one? And of course, there are specialized bikes like a cargo bike that was shown in the picture with Marloes children. That's a more expensive bike, but the normal people use normal bicycles. For instance,
but also the normal bicycles get stolen, of course. But then, well, when I buy a new bike, I make sure I have an insurance against theft. So, and also I make sure I have a really, really, really good luck. With and I know that a lot of students ride older bicycles, and then they have the lock is more expensive than the bicycle itself. But of course we have theft, but it's not that there are there are more and less expensive bicycles. So I think a basic bicycle you can buy for like €300, and then and that's not the one that gets stolen. It's the e-bike or the racing bike or the cargo bike.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the swap feeds? With swap feeds? I don't know.
Probably. Could you tell us a bit more?
Yes, swap feeds. It's called swap feeds in the Netherlands, but swap a bike. It's a formula where you can rent a bike for €10 a month. and whatever happens to the bike, whether it gets stolen, whether it's broken, within the hour there's a replaced bike for you available. It will be bring to you to the office, to your home, or wherever you are. And if you look at those bikes, they're that simple. You can cycle with it. There's a light on it, 2 wheels, a saddle, and a steering wheel, and that's it. And that's conquering the Netherlands as we speak, and that shows the simplicity we use for a bike.
Fascinating discussion. I feel I've got some more aspects of the discussion that I'd like to move us on to in the remainder of the session. I'm sure we could keep going for the rest of the day here, and I particularly like the concept of understanding more about swappies and rattle bikes as well. Great great concepts there. And also, just one quick observation is, if you are focused on promoting and maintaining and increasing cycling, you look at the reasons and look at the barriers as obstacles, and how do you get around them, and how do we address them, and how do we make it easy for people to use cycling, and how do we address theft, and how do we maintain the road, the paths, and how do we actually do all the small things that you need to do to make it attractive. And I think it's that can-do attitude. It's that focused. These are difficult issues. They take time, and they need to be addressed. But unless you're addressing them, you're not going to create that cycling revolution that we've so longed for in the UK. Right. So next section, what we really want to do is start to think about those barriers that are restricting our ability to increase cycling in the the things we need to focus most urgently on to significantly increase cycling in the UK. So we're going to look at safety and standards and behaviour change in particular, and learning from Dutch experience. I'd like to think about how we can best create that safer and more inclusive cycling infrastructure in the UK, and what do you think holistic planning really means in reality? I.e., how do we actually make sure we join up our work on traffic signal timings with tough decisions about road space allocation, etc. Marloes, would you like to give that a first stab?
Yes, of course. Safety is very important. If you cannot ride your bicycle safe, then you shouldn't. And that's well, also in the Netherlands, really important. And our main policy is that when we can dually use our roads, then it's okay. But if it's not safe, then we split them up. So then the bicycle lane has to be separate from the car lane. And we think of different types of roads. We have these access roads where there's a separated bicycle path, but also the more residential areas where when we have already talked about livability, but there are low speed limits, I think 18 miles per hour, but also what we discussed before, it's we have the woonerven, which means areas for living, and there we have even more reduced speed limits of 9 miles per hour. So there's a difference between the access roads and the residential areas, and that's where we can provide a safe cycling infrastructure. And it's not always separated. It's sometimes together, and sometimes you have to separate this. And it's when we have a junction and we have to make a choice whether it has to be safe or there has to be a free flow of cars. That's not the decision we're going to make. It always has to be safe, but we can split up. We can change the route for the bicycles if it's safer that way. So yeah, sometimes there's a route, sometimes there's a tunnel for cyclists. but safety is the main priority, and for me it means that I'm confident to cycle with my 6 and 8-year-old kids without worrying. Well, I will also always be a bit worried, but it's safe enough to go cycling with them. So I think that's the main point: safety first, always. So,
Marloes, pardon my Dutch, but Woon-Erven, is that close enough? Woon-Erven,
yeah.
Streets for Living, is a concept that I'm familiar with. I mean, I remember researching that as part of my my undergrad studies back in the early 90s, and it was a concept that was around then, and it was we constantly talk about sort of how do we create livable neighborhood streets for living, and it's really interesting to hear you say that we always prioritize de-trafficking neighborhoods in order to improve safety, and that becomes priority. Kerry, contrast that to the UK, and the kind of whenever we try and de-traffic a neighbourhood, it just becomes politically so challenging that everybody sort of shies back away from it. So, kind of, what do we need to do differently? How do you manage to do this in the Netherlands, and we find it so difficult in the UK? Kerry, do you want to reflect on some of your observations? You're on mute.
Apologies, that's me. Yeah, we know that people want segregated cycle routes so that they feel safe, and we all know that. Yet there's still not enough available. I know there's a lot of progress in that area, but it's really key to allowing people to sort of to feel safe in their cycling journeys, and a lot of that's to do with what we talked about around funding pots become available, and there isn't a sort of overall strategy that is done, and there are gaps in the strategic network, and it means that those kind of joining up journeys and joining up routes to ensure that those key trip attractors like schools and like hospitals, and also key employment locations, to ensure that they're really connected to the active travel network, and that's an option, so that you can genuinely have those end-to-end journeys with safe crossing points for cyclists and pedestrians, and we kind of need to do more of that, I think. And I was reflecting on some work that they're doing in Manchester, where they've introduced the UK's first Cyclops junction, which has been designed to fully segregate cyclists from general traffic and improve safety for everyone. And it's also aimed at allowing pedestrians to get where they want to be in fewer stages, and giving them more space, and so more schemes such as those which really prioritise pedestrians and cyclists are needed, just following that sort of the Dutch principles.
I think those examples are fantastic, but they still seem to be the exception rather than the norm in the UK. And I'm really keen to understand how we change that approach. I mean, in the Netherlands, you must have people who are saying, "Oh, I don't want you to make it more difficult for me to park my car in my neighbourhood." And you must have people who are really kind of anti-cycling, probably less so now after several decades. But how do you address those people? Marloes, any? When I've talked to you about this before in the past, it's been a bit of an alien concept, isn't it? Because you're kind of like, why would you have people who are anti-cycling?
No, I get it when you remove parking space, but I don't think that's what we do very often. But when we develop a new neighborhood, then we think about how much parking space do we really need, and are there other ways to travel? So we can use shared mobility, shared cars. We can encourage cycling. And then people choose to live there, and knowing that they cannot have their car in front of their house. So maybe Mark thinks different, but I don't think we remove parking space very often. But it's,
Mark, one of the observations you've made to me in the past is around kind of well, if you ask people, if they would like to live in a safe neighbourhood where their children can cycle freely and it's got clean air and it is easy to get around and it's less polluted and it's less noisy, then why wouldn't people say yes? And I think we tend to focus on the negatives rather than the positives, and perhaps we need to think more about the sort of being able to sell the types of livability in the neighbourhoods we're creating. I'm going to move us on. Standards. Mentioned earlier, Mark, that the Dutch have just embarked on cycle design, what you call 3.0. Which considers more in more prominence the quality of the urban design and the cycling environment. What do you think we can learn from your approach to help us ensure we now kind of skip as much as cycle design? I'm going to say 2.0, but we're probably on 1.0 at the moment. How can we avoid 1.0, 2.0, and can go straight to 3.0?
Well, it's going to be a big assignment, but I don't think it's very easy to just copy paste what we did in the Netherlands to the UK. I'm sorry if I'm gonna if I killed some dreams over there, but I've been working on several studies as well as in China, as in the UK, as in the US. It always comes to customization, but I think our guidelines may be able to help, because we've designed guidelines for what width you need for the number of cyclists you're going to expect. But I think it starts with dreaming. This webinar is one of the things to help this started, because if you start dreaming of your city or neighborhood as a cycling Valhalla, then you're gonna look at your city with a different view, and not just by access only for cars, and not just kicking out all the cars and implementing the cyclists, but it's a little the same way like Marloes said. Just look at your network, and depending on the role you want to give to each street in your network, start redesigning. And then if you start redesigning for an access road, or a road for flow, like the big motorways, or is the residential area, and if you start by making those decisions, then you have a dream that's more reachable, and don't start too big. I see a lot of cities, not only in the UK but also across Europe, that start with putting in one cycle path, which leads from somewhere to nowhere, or ends at a lamppost, or ends at a bridge, and then it's sort yourself. But start in a smaller residential area with creating a small network. Make schools accessible, make shops accessible, and show people there's a different way of transport available, and encourage them to use it. But it's not just the infrastructure you need to address, but it's also the facilities you need to address near their homes. So create parking spaces, like Carrie asked before, but also include employers, because if you look at the Netherlands, employers provide parking spaces near offices, within offices, provide showers, provide tax benefits for people that come by bike instead of by car. So it's not just the infrastructure, and I think that a lot of cities are only aiming on the infrastructure, but it's on the whole picture and the whole package.
And I think the more cyclists you have within a culture or within an area, the more focus there is on the how to facilitate more cycling. Yeah. And just contrasting kind of some of the approaches that a number of European cities have taken has been less around the focus on cycle routes and more on the focus to de-traffic the urban centre and create a de-trafficked environment that encourages cycling to that de-trafficked centre. Is that what we're talking about with regards to the kind of 3.0, thinking about the quality of space that we're kind of trying to create and the quality of the cycle routes?
More or less. Cycling 3.0, as I call it right now, is making the whole country accessible by bike. So we've got enormous cycle paths. We got those high-speed cycle paths. We know the speed pedelec is gaining ground, but we still in the Netherlands, yes, we have missing links. There are areas that cannot be reached by bike, or a bigger detour is still necessary. And by creating a bridge or tunnel or providing extra connections, even our dense network will be even more dense. And if we have a dense network, if we have a connected network, people tend to switch a mode because they see the benefits. Because if you look at cycling, regarding to the first thing we talked about, Colin, the cyclists in the Netherlands aren't the people in spandex or in lycra, but we are the cyclists in the Netherlands are the normal people that go to school, to the work, to friends or whatever they want to go to. It's healthy. It gives you the exercise. In most cases, especially in the Netherlands, it's even faster than taking a car. So it's all about the benefits. And then there's the last thing. A lot of people, as well as policymakers, as well as shop owners, are afraid if my shop cannot be reached by car, it's bad for selling goods. It is not. We've got stats here in the Netherlands where taking out room for cars and providing a bicycle parking in front of the shop increases how do you say this?
Footfall.
Footfall.
Yeah. Footfall.
Yeah. It increases by 25 to 30%.
Yeah.
Because people can easier reach the shop by bike.
And there's a number of studies consolidated recently, well, quite a while ago now, by Living Streets on their website, which shows the economic benefits of increasing accessibility by cycling and walking. And there's a lot of evidence that's available. I think it's just sometimes difficult to reach back into that and use that to justify further investment. If people have got quite a closed mind to that in the first place, but I absolutely recognise that need to dream big and to start with a vision. Kerry, just make a few kind of quick reflections on standards in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I think just reflecting on what Mark's saying, you know, the good smart street design really is shown in the Netherlands to improve people's lives, and including reducing the emissions and making the area livable neighbourhoods, improving air quality, making areas more safe, and supporting local businesses. And there's still quite a lot of negativity in the UK around introducing these. You know, some of the pop-up schemes that have been introduced recently have had to have been removed because of pushback from local communities around their concerns and the fact that they felt perhaps they didn't have enough say initially in the implementation. So I think the lessons that can be learned around standards from the Netherlands are important, and with the publication of LTN 120, that guidance is a good step forward in helping to standardise those high quality safe infrastructure, and sort of the key thing is really to acknowledge that cyclists should be treated the same as vehicles, and that they shouldn't be required to share space with pedestrians.
And I remember seeing a number of vision documents by European across Europe, and a lot of the work we've done in on sustainable urban mobility with the with colleagues in a number of different European countries on a number of research and demonstration projects, European projects, is constantly show the power of a compelling vision and saying, this is what your town could look like. This is how it could improve. This is a vision for the future, and use that as a consultation document to get that buy-in and get that positive attitude to help unlock some of those challenges that you'll have on the way. And I think that's something that, to me, often feels really lacking in the UK, and something that we can really get some focus on. The next section, I really just kind of on that theme, just like to reflect on how you think we can help to win the hearts and minds of the general public, to really stimulate the UK cycling revolution. We keep talking about it, and you see the gear change document that was published by our government last year to big fanfare, and Boris has personally endorsed it. But what is it we need to do more of? Marloes, some observations from you to start with, please.
Yeah, I think a big revolution starts with small benefits. So when you want to win the hearts and minds of the UK people, you have to let them experience the benefits of cycling, and also you have to celebrate minor improvements and successes. So you can think about a marketing campaign for cyclists, but I think it's better to stimulate a specific target group, such as commuters or high school students, and encourage them to cycle to school or work. And well, they have the same direction, and by creating some main routes to the destination, it can be the start of a cycling network through the city. For example, you have to let them try it a few days or a few weeks to experience the benefits. But when you do that, you have to make sure that the basics are in place. So they have to have a safe route, a reliable route, and not a detour. A parking space at school or at work. And of course, they have to have a bicycle, and not just a racing bicycle or a mountain bike, but maybe to lend them a bicycle to try it. And then if you have some enthusiastic people, they can be the ambassadors, so they can spread the word. I think it has to come from the cyclists themselves to to marketing their students. I think it's important to realize that you cannot create a direct cycling revolution, but you have to start with small steps and let them have a positive experience with cycling for daily use.
Just a quick question, Marloes. When you open a new cycle route, or you make some cycle improvements, do you tell people?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we tell people, because otherwise they won't use it. And if it's a new connection between cities, then well, they have to learn that there is a new connection, and then they can try and use it. So of course we tell in local newspapers, and even before it has been opened, so they know it's coming. And that's also what I would advise: just celebrate minor successes. If you have a cycling route and there's just one part opened yet, celebrate it and let people know that you're working on it.
So, Kerry, do you want to just kind of reflect on some of your experiences in the UK?
I think there's still a lot to be done in this area in the UK. I mean, I mentioned earlier about some of the pushback, the negative press, and the negative publicity from some of the schemes that have been implemented. And there was one comment in the press around teachers where you'll find this quite amusing, I think, Mark and Marloes. Teachers considering quitting due to stress from the low traffic neighbourhoods being implemented because they need to drive to work because they have to carry heavy bags to school. Now, while obviously we have sympathy with that, I don't think you would find that in the Netherlands particularly. So there's a lot of difficulties around that, kind of getting that community buy-in and having strong political leadership to really support implementing those and really address those community concerns, but still push forward and sort of explain the benefits, because most people genuinely want to see their areas more livable. They want to have better air quality. They want their children to feel safe on the roads. They want their children to be able to cycle. They would probably like to walk and cycle to work if they could. But the aspects of that feeling of inconvenience, or their freedom, their liberty to drive their car, seems to always come back and rear its head.
May I add something?
Yeah,
Please.
of course.
Yeah, because I think the main objective is not to present it as we take out cars and we put in bicycles, but we add a different alternative way of transportation. And that's what we do. And if people have the alternative and try it for several times and see the benefits themselves, they will demand for more. And that's what happened in the 70s and 80s in the Netherlands. People demanded for more livable streets because they saw the benefits at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think it's that people don't really appreciate enough the benefits of of more livable neighbourhoods, and the kind of understand the importance of cycling as a mode of transport if we are genuinely to meet our aspirations to reduce our carbon emissions that have been stubbornly high in the transport sector, particularly in the UK, for decades. We need to illustrate to them and be able to communicate to our society, to wider society, the benefits of and the attractiveness of this new vision. And I think we can take a lot from that in the Netherlands and really start to sort of to use that as a way of just demonstrating what neighbourhoods could look like and how we can retrofit and how we can create that change. All fascinating discussion. I think we'll just take time for another poll here. Hannah, do you want to take us through this one again?
Yep, sure. So as before, I imagine you're all pros at this by now. So if you can go to menti.com, it is the same code that we used before. So on the bottom of the slide, 3598139, and it's around, the question is focusing on those things that you think we could look to unlock in the UK to increase cycling. And as before, you can tick as many options as you think are significant. So we'll just give you a few seconds to click the boxes you think are important, and then Helen will once again bring it up. But we'll just give you 15 seconds or so to kind of absorb the list and choose the ones you think are best.
Quite exciting. It's like waiting for the football results to come through on the video printer, isn't it?
Helen, do you want to bring it up now? Because it takes a second or so to the screen to come into life.
It's cool to see the amount of people that are in the call.
Yes, it was up to 70 at one point. I don't know what it is now, but I haven't looked. But
yeah, over 50, 60, 62.
Cool.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. So it should be coming up in a second. Please do continue to fill in the poll if you're still looking at it on your phone. The results aren't lost; they just come in. As you said, it's a live kind of update, if you see what I mean. And I can see there's still lots of comments coming in too. Is the polling thing refreshing, Helen? Because I can see at the moment it says 13 have responded. I guess it's on potentially a bit of a lag there as well.
So interesting observations again. a lot of people agree that we substantially need to increase new funding. And you look at the promise of millions that we have in cycling to be spent in the UK compared to the billions that have been allocated to perhaps just a couple of other road infrastructure projects. It kind of it shows perhaps a continued disparity in the UK on that funding, and I think if we're genuinely trying to create this cycling revolution, we do need a way of unlocking that. I think this is something that Active Travel England and their counterparts that will be developed over time in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland will be really starting to drive some focus on, because government's obviously very concerned about spending money on cycling that then creates a backlash publicly. So it needs to be good quality routes, and it needs to be well considered, well designed. And it's how do we actually get that revolution in design, and how do we make sure that the contractors and local designers are actually providing the quality of the infrastructure that we're all genuinely seeking in the UK. I think that comes back to sort of focusing on improving safety of streets. There is a very high priority, that livable neighbourhoods. Again, I think what we tend to do is put blanket 20-mile-an-hour limits across our towns and cities. And we could be thinking alongside those how we better improve the ability to create those traffic-free zones and those safe cycle routes alongside that, rather than doing it as a safety initiative. And it's not a cycling initiative, it's a safety initiative. How do we provide a more integrated approach that really focuses on improving quality of life? And again, there's a really high reflection in the poll there of the need for us to nurture cycling for the culture from a younger age, and to ensure that we get more focus on cycling to school. And coming up on the outside again is the observation that we need to change our policy and planning laws. We do require some detailed and robust investment in cycling connectivity to accompany all infrastructure improvement projects, development projects, regeneration projects, in order to create the cycling revolution that we've long discussed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Colin, just on that note, there's a question in the chat around the kind of policy and planning laws, and around the role that planning policy and engagement with developers has in the Netherlands. I wondered if Mark or Marloes could comment on that. Is there any insight in how you do that would be helpful? Oh, Mark?
No, I'm just... my laptop is heating up. Yeah, I was constantly afraid I'm going to be kicked out of the meeting. Sorry, can you repeat the question, please? Yeah, there's quite a lot of people talking about the need to change policy and planning laws in the UK. And I wondered if there was a question around whether you have any insight in terms of policy plan and engagement with the developers to ensure that cycle infrastructure is implemented. Well, it connects to something Marloes already discussed. As you see, for instance, the Cycling 3.0 I mentioned before, that's pushed forward by the government in our country. They're aiming on this future network, what do we want to create. And they are challenging the local governments to put in their requests for better connections, more cycling facilities, and so every local government can put in their own request, and the country what's it called, not our local government, but regional. No, not regional, but the country. National government, sorry, thank you. is combining those all together to show it as a future plan, what we want to reach in the next 20 years. And they're also working on funding, so as well from the EU extra funding, but also setting up our own way of funding from the nationwide to the regional governments. And we have those constant discussions with the national and the local government about the funding for all infrastructure projects. And it's a cycle that goes around every year. And cycling was not a point on the agenda for the last 20 years, for 30 years. But with the implementation of this new future network, cycling will be a point on the agenda for the next 20 years. Next to safety, next to big investments in harbors, airports, etc.
Okay, thank you. And just thinking about the 3.0, there's a question around e-scooters and whether they're allowed legally on cycle routes, and are they part of 3.0?
Marloes, you are fond of e-scooters.
Yeah, well, I tried one a few days ago, but it was really cold because I didn't move. But yeah, well, we have e-scooters and e-scooters. We have e-scooters that can that have a maximum speed of 25 kilometers per hour. I don't know the miles per hour. I think about 16 or so. And we have e-scooters that can go like 45 kilometers per hour. And that's the difference, because also e-bikes can go 25 kilometers per hour. So e-scooters with a low speed limit are allowed on cycle paths, and the faster ones are only outside of the cities. So there's a difference, and this is because the slower ones are will have almost the same speed as normal cyclists. So there's difference between them.
Okay.
And to addition, the speed pedelec we have also, that's human powered, which can reach up speeds of 40-45 kilometers an hour, is also mandatory to drive on the road and not on the cycle path anymore.
Yeah, it's an e-scooter, therefore it's not just a bicycle anymore.
Okay. Fascinating, thank you. Let's see what else we've got.
Now I can see the questions.
There's a question here around an interesting one, which maybe goes some way towards behaviour change as well, and around, is there an issue of class in the UK affecting people's desire to or not to cycle, and people are reluctant to be seen cycling to work because having a space in a car park is a kind of a status symbol. How does that transfer to the Netherlands, or does it not?
There was a picture of the king cycling. There was our prime minister cycling. Our director is using a speed pedelec to travel, I think, 25 kilometers every day. So it's not about class. Maybe the type of bicycle, the brand you have. If you have a Coca, then you are really really nice, and if you have another brand, it's less, but it's not about class.
Yeah,
I think if you look at the moment, if you're a cyclist in the UK, generally outside of some of our cycling cities, you're battling against heavy traffic in poor road conditions, and you are seen as kind of sort of vulnerable, and you go, why would people want to put themselves at risk cycling along these busy streets in the pollution? And I think it's a perception thing. Actually, if we start to have those positive role models, we have the high quality routes, that class things, and people see that everybody's doing it, and there's that constant drip feed of the messaging, and that focus on the vision, and we're celebrating successes, and we're looking at the end-to-end journeys. All these things start to fall into place, and I think that kind of the whole class issue starts to go away.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but I feel this is a really exciting and fascinating conversation, and we could probably spend a lot more time. And I know that all of you will be happy to answer questions and further questions offline from colleagues at a later stage. But what I'd like to do right now is just perhaps hand over to Hannah to do some closing remarks, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you so much to the speakers today, and also to you for all of the what I think is a really rich vein of commentary and questions in the chat box. And what we'll look to do after this call is to collate all of those. Hopefully you've had responses to quite a few of them, but if we'll look and see whether we can actually put some written comments or responses to some of the big questions in there. So, I mean, that's been just fascinating. And there's just some key kind of things I heard, which I've noted during kind of the last hour and a bit that we've been talking. I have to say that I have got a vision of the Queen on an e-scooter, having just talked about the King on a bicycle. I imagine her going around Buckingham Palace on an e-scooter, which is making me smile. So I think that's probably a key, one of the key comments. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be irreverent, but I just had this mental image of the Queen on a scooter. So that actually takes me to where my first comment that I noted, which was around, I think, Colin, it was you saying we see the Netherlands as a nation of cyclists and they see themselves as a nation which has just got a lot of people that ride bikes, which I think is an interesting kind of perception thing we have. It's just normal, I've written down here. So that was kind of picking up on the historical side. And even though, you know, we've all had seen the growth of the car, in Holland, that has been pushed back harder in terms of the focus on design of urban centres and elsewhere. I wrote down here, no school buses, which is amazing. I grew up in a rural county where it was 8 miles to school and it was very hilly. It was in Cornwall. So the thought of cycling to school, but even now makes me think, that would have been quite a trek. But fascinating, you don't have the offer isn't there, so people have developed alternatives, which is obviously cycling, which I thought was very, very interesting, and the number of kids that are driven to school in this country, which I think Kerry referred to. The kind of the livability side of things, you talked about bike-orientated development, which for me triggered the kind of the thought around the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is a concept which is gaining traction in this country. Everything is within 20 minutes, whether it's walking or cycling, which I think is getting more prominence. Funding, yes. Schemes in this country tend to be valued on their finance rather than all what I call the softer but as critical elements, such as livability, accessibility, health and safety, which I think Mark referred to. E-bikes originally seen as for old people. That made me laugh as well. Highways maintenance, cycleway maintenance, let me phrase that, has been as important as the maintenance of the roadway, which I think is really important. I learned some new acronyms like SWAPI and Cyclops, which I just Googled and now I know what it is. I had heard about the Manchester Cycleway, but now I know it's called Cyclops. Picking up on the really important issues around safety, absolutely paramount, and nobody would argue with that. But I think it's really interesting how in Holland the focus on road safety for people that aren't in a vehicle has obviously is writ large through the way that you plan your streets and your allocation of space. And then around the final one, there's one around standards as well, and customizing standards. So how you thought that we could take the Dutch kind of guide 3.0 and not try and implement it entirely, but learn from it and learn from your experiences, which is clearly what we're doing today. And then finally around the behaviour change, I think that was a really interesting one. You were suggesting that perhaps we targeted certain groups and tried to get them to become ambassadors of cycling, which I think is an interesting concept. I think, as Kerry said, there was a huge rush to introduce pop-up cycleways in response to the pandemic, and there has been some backlash to some of those schemes. The majority are still there and have been very successful, but there are kind of perceptions and strong feelings around how these schemes should be implemented in the UK, which we need to kind of address and take the whole community along. And I think it was Mark referenced, they need to bring businesses along. It's just not the individual on the bike, it's what happens when they get to their place of work or their place of education or whatever it might be. And some really interesting results from the polls, actually. So the barriers were seen as being culture, local commitment and lack of roots, and then the priorities were around street safety, starting young, so getting kids on bikes and keeping them on their bikes, because all kids learn to ride bikes even in this country, but then, as you talked about, it kind of drifts off when they get on a bus to go to school or get driven to school. And then funding is an issue too. So that's been amazing, really great conversation. So thank you so much for chairing it, Colin, as well. It's been really helpful. We will come back out to you, as I said, with the kind of commentary and the questions. You will be able to review this seminar or this webinar online when we put it on our YouTube account. So Helen will email you all with the links to that and with any documentation. But thank you so much again on my behalf of ADEPT and Arcadis for joining us today. I don't know if you want to add any final comments, Colin?
Just a big thank you to everyone for participation. It's been great. It's been really exciting, and look forward to speaking to more of you about how we can create the UK cycling revolution.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.